before we get to what it is that protesters want today, it is perhaps worth just taking a step back and considering how extraordinary this is for Algeria. In the space of just 6 weeks, millions of people have entirely peacefully thrown out their leader of 20 years. And when you compare that to other countries in the region that tried something similar during the Arab Spring, revolutions that were far bloodier, I think you can see that this has been quite a remarkable achievement for Algerians. But yes, they will be back in the streets today. And that's because Bouteflika, for many people, has simply been just the figurehead for an entire system that hasn't been working well at all. They say that the elites, the pouvoir, as they call it in Algeria, the powers are just working for themselves. It's a deeply corrupt clientele industry, and they say all of that needs to change. Now, there are a few signs for now that that's going to work. When you look at when Bouteflika formally handed over power on Tuesday, he gave power then to a man called Abdelaziz Bouteflika. Now, he is simply Bouteflika's right-hand man, so there is little suggestion for the moment there is about to be a major change. But there will be, in 3 months' time, in theory, elections in Algeria. Now, that could be a moment where you could see some tangible change in the country. But for the moment, we have no idea whether those elections will actually happen on time, whether they'll be free and fair, and who will be allowed to be on the ballot. Will we see opposition candidates being able to run, or will we simply see the same system, the same power in place, but with just a different figurehead?
So a lot of uncertainty ahead. Let's assume those elections go forward as planned. What's the opposition doing to organise itself?
Well, the opposition is trying to organise itself, but remember, the opposition is not a monolithic, unified force. It's a series of deeply fragmented, separate groups, so much so that when it looked like elections were to be held as normal this month with Bouteflika on the ballot paper, the opposition couldn't even agree who it was they would put to oppose him on that ballot. You've got secularist groups, you've got Islamist groups, and a whole range of people in between. So what's been actually quite interesting to observe is in the past 6 weeks of protests, the opposition were almost caught off guard by the scale of public anger against Bouteflika. And that's meant that in the past couple of weeks, they've been almost sidelined during this movement. And you've seen really civil society groups lead that public protest against Bouteflika himself. And so I think when we're thinking about what kinds of opposition parties in the future might represent a meaningful challenge to the regime, those people are likely to come from that street movement, not from the traditional opposition. Now, we do have one name that's coming up again and again. That's Mustafa Bouchachi. Now, he's a human rights lawyer who's really kind of become an almost informal spokesperson for the streets. No sign at the moment that he's about to form his own political party or anything as concrete as that. But I think if this is to feel for real Algerians like a moment of actual change, it will need to be somebody like that from the streets and not someone who's represented those more traditional parties in the country.
And Nadia, tell us a bit about what role the army has now.
Yeah, well, I think for the moment, far more than those civil society groups and the traditional opposition, it is the army that, at least in the short term, will be deciding the future of Algeria. Now, remember, it is likely that Bouteflika would still be in power today if it wasn't for the decisive intervention of the chief of the army, Ahmed Gad bin Salah. Now, he said last week that Bouteflika was too sick to continue to rule the country and that he needed to step aside. So there he was, interestingly, the head of the army, effectively siding with the streets. But that is a very strange position for the army to take because, of course, for a very long time in Algeria, the army has effectively been the backbone of the regime. And there are many people who say that Ahmed Gad bin Salah himself, the army chief, has his eyes on the top job as well. And I think I mentioned the Arab Spring earlier, Will, and I think you can here make a possible comparison with Egypt after its revolution in 2011. Now, obviously, that was far bloodier than what we're seeing in Algeria today. But remember, there was a period of huge instability after which the army came in the form of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, stabilising things, but not really providing any of that meaningful change that our Egyptians had demanded so strongly in the streets. And I think if you do see Ahmed Gad bin Salah, the army chief, taking a far bigger role now, as is rumoured, there are fears in Algeria that you may see something similar happening there.